Imagine a world where words were sharper than swords, where poets were the celebrities of their time, and where entire tribes were immortalized through the power of verse. Welcome to the world of Jahiliya poetry, the poetic masterpieces of pre-Islamic Arabia. The poetry of the age of ignorance was far from being ignorant. These poems were eloquent expressions of life in the harsh Arabian desert. They preserved history, celebrated heroism, and painted vivid pictures of a time when survival depended on strength, wit, and loyalty. Historians suggest era of ignorance refers not to a lack of intellect, but rather to the lack of divine guidance that Islam would later bring. The Jahiliya poetry is proof of that. In the Jahiliya period, poetry held a central role in Arab society. It was more than just an art form. It was a means of communication, a repository of history, a tool for social cohesion, and even a weapon of psychological warfare. Pre-Islamic Arabia was an oral culture where poetry was one of the primary ways to express ideas, share news, settle conflicts, and preserve cultural values. Poetry in the Jahiliya era was far more than an artistic pursuit. It was a way of life. Poets were revered as both storytellers and warriors of the pen, often celebrated for their eloquence and bravery. The power of words was so important that a poet could sway public opinion, settle disputes, or even incite wars. In fact, some poets like ANTARA Ibn SHADDAD were as famous for their battle cries as for their poetry. The poetry of this time is rich with themes such as tribal loyalty, honor, love, revenge, and the harsh beauty of the Arabian desert. It's a poetry that doesn't just tell stories, it captures the essence of a society that lived and died by its customs and values. Through poetry, tribes could express their unique identity, building a sense of unity and pride among their members. Poetic verses helped reinforce the values and qualities that the tribe wanted to uphold. Poetry served to inspire courage and loyalty among tribe members, particularly during conflicts. Through praise of warriors and their heroic deeds, poets could motivate tribespeople to uphold their honor and defend their community. Poetry was a way for each tribe to celebrate and promote its values, achievements, and virtues. Poets would compose qasidas or odes that praised their tribe's bravery, generosity, and nobility, often contrasting these qualities with the perceived shortcomings of rival tribes. These poems asserted the tribe's superiority, portraying them as brave, strong, and honorable, while the enemy was often depicted as weak or dishonorable. This form of taunting was serious, as insults to a tribe's honor were grounds for retaliation. Poetry played a role in the feuds and rivalries that defined tribal relations in pre-Islamic Arabia. If one tribe wronged another, poets would compose satirical or scornful poems that ridiculed the offending tribe and shamed them for their actions. This type of poetry, known as hijara, could spark outrage and provoke retaliation, thereby sustaining blood feuds and cycles of revenge. Battle poems, recited before, during, or after a conflict, often highlighted acts of bravery, reinforcing the idea that dying for one's tribe was a noble and honorable end. Poetry was often used as psychological warfare, especially in times of conflict. Poets engaged in verbal duels with rival tribes, composing verses that mocked their opponents, emphasized their weaknesses, or shamed them for cowardice. This practice not only demoralized the enemy, but also uplifted the poet's own tribe, boosting morale and fortifying them before the battle. In the Jahiliya period, poets were highly respected figures with considerable influence within their tribes. They were considered the voice of the tribe, expressing the collective emotions and opinions of their people. As both storytellers and historians, poets held authority in shaping the tribe's narrative and preserving its reputation. Poets were instrumental in reinforcing social values such as hospitality, generosity, courage, and honor. Many qasidas praised leaders and individuals who embodied these qualities, encouraging others to follow their example. These values were essential in a harsh desert environment where alliances and social bonds were critical for survival. Poetry upheld these virtues, promoting a code of ethics that guided the tribe's behavior and interactions with others. Besides its functional role, poetry was also a form of entertainment and communal activity. Public recitations, often at fairs or gatherings, allowed tribespeople to come together to enjoy and appreciate the skill of their poets. The annual Ukaz market near Mecca was famous for its poetry competitions, where poets would showcase their talents and tribes could gain prestige based on the skill of their poets. This fostered a culture of poetic excellence and allowed different tribes to interact, sometimes peacefully, and share their cultural expressions. The greatest poetry of the Jahiliya period, one collection that stands above all others, is the Muallaqat. The name Muallaqat means the hanging odes. These were a collection of 7 poems and are considered the finest examples of pre-Islamic Arabic poetry. These poems were composed by 7 legendary poets, each representing a different tribe, and each poet's work embodies the themes and values of their time. The Muallaqat are not just poetic masterpieces, they are cultural treasures that have shaped Arabic literature for centuries. These poems were passed down orally for generations and became a cornerstone of Arab identity and literary heritage. The Muallaqat set the standard for Arabic poetry, influencing generations of poets during the Islamic Golden Age and beyond. But why were these poems called Muallaqat or hanging odes? There are a few explanations for the name, but the most popular one is that these poems were so admired that they were said to have been hung on the walls of the KAABA in Mecca, the most sacred place in Arabia, so that all who came to the KAABA could admire their beauty and eloquence. Some also believe that the name comes from the idea that these poems were so revered they were metaphorically hanging in the minds of the people, always remembered and recited. They say that the 7 Muallaqat, the select displayed poems, were hung on the KAABA because when one of the Arabs composed an ode, he would exhibit it to Quraysh. If they approved of it, they would hang it on the KAABA in recognition of its worth. It is from this practice that the 7 odes were gathered. Muallaqat used evocative poetry, which is a form of poetry that stirs deep emotions, vivid imagery, or strong memories in the reader's mind. It was designed to invoke or elicit feelings, thoughts, or sensory experiences, often through the use of rich, descriptive language and figurative devices like metaphors, similes, and imagery. Creating a deep connection with the poem, it transports the reader to another place or time, evokes a personal memory, or stirs a complex set of feelings. The 7 poets who wrote these poems were IMRUL QAIS, ANTARA bin SHADDAD, Labid bin Rabia, Amr ibn KALTHUM, Tarafa ibn al-Abd, Zuhair ibn Abu Sulma, and lastly, a female poet named KHANSA. IMRUL QAIS is perhaps the most famous poet of the Jahiliya era and known as Prince of Poetry. IMRUL QAIS was born around the early 6th century CE in the Arabian Peninsula. His father, Al-Harith ibn Amr, was the king of the Kinda tribe, which gives us a glimpse into the world of royalty that shaped his early years. However, despite his noble birth, IMRUL QAIS's life was marked by tragedy and rebellion. According to legend, after his father's death, IMRUL QAIS was disinherited by his own tribe as his political enemies sought to undermine his position. This betrayal became a crucial turning point in his life, driving him to abandon his tribal duties and embark on a life of adventure and defiance. Here are the beginning verses of IMRUL QAIS's Muallaqat, which are also personally my favorite. Halt, friends, let us weep, remembering a beloved and a dwelling, by the edge of the sandy desert between Dakul and Haumal. There she dwelled long ago, and we once roamed here together. And my love for her lit a fire in my heart that has never died. Many years have passed and the ruins lie deserted, their traces barely seen, weathered by the wind and rains. Yet I still remember her smile, her laughter, her gentle voice, and the sorrow that came when we parted under the fading stars. Imru al-Qais's Muallaqat is filled with romantic and nature imagery, often blending the beauty of his surroundings with the intensity of his emotions. Another poem, or Muallaqat, was written by Amr ibn Kulthum, a proud warrior and chieftain who composed his Muallaqat as a declaration of his tribe's strength and honor. Born into the Taghlib tribe, which was part of the larger Banu Adnan Arab Confederation, Amr came from a line of warriors, and his poetry reflects the values of his tribe. His verses are bold, showcasing his pride and unwillingness to bow to others. Here are some of my favorite verses from his Muallaqat. Raise your heads high, O sons of Taghlib, my tribe. We have never known submission, nor the shame of defeat. When the wine flows, we are the first to drink, and when the sword is drawn, we are the first to bleed. Let others boast of their lineage, but none compare to us, for in both peace and war, we are the unbroken line. Amr's Muallaqat celebrates the glory and unity of his tribe, Taghlib, through vivid imagery of feasting and fighting, asserting their superiority and resilience. Antara bin Shaddad's poetry combines themes of love and valor. Known for his prowess in battle, his lines often reflect pride in his achievements and his deep devotion to his beloved, Ablah. Antara's words illustrate the fierce loyalty and courage that characterized Bedouin warriors, portraying himself as both fierce in battle and tender in love. Tarafa Ibne al-Abad, in his poetry, champions a philosophy of enjoying life to its fullest, emphasizing indulgence in wine, companionship, and the fleeting joys of youth. This juxtaposition of hedonism and fatalism reflects a profound awareness of life's transience. His famous verse is, "And if you cannot push back the hand of death, then take your share of this world's pleasures, for we will be carried away too soon." Other poets of the Muallaqat covered many different themes in their poetry. Their poetry was about the themes of nostalgia for the beloved, journey and adventure, tribal pride and boastfulness, as well as moral and philosophical wisdom. The Arabic names for such themes are NASEEB, RAHIL, FAKHAR, and HIKMAH. The themes of love and longing in the Muallaqat inspired Sufi poetry, where they were reinterpreted as metaphors for divine love and the soul's journey toward God. The Muallaqat heavily influenced the genre of adab, a broad literary field combining prose, poetry, and moral instruction. Even today, the Muallaqat are studied and revered, not just for their linguistic brilliance, but for their insight into the values, struggles, and emotions of pre-Islamic society. They provide us with a window into a time when poetry was the most powerful means of expression. When the Quran was revealed, its powerful rhythmic style and captivating imagery reminded them of poetry, leading many to assume it was a highly advanced form of this art. The Quran's linguistic mastery exceeded anything in the Arabic language, making it seem like an extraordinary creation by a gifted poet. Though it was neither poetry nor prose, the Quran's rhythmic flow and use of rhyme in some verses resembled the musicality of poetry, particularly the saj, the rhymed prose form. Its recitation left listeners in awe, moving them emotionally and intellectually, similar to how they experienced great poetry. Many Arabs, especially those opposed to Islam, rejected the idea of divine intervention. Instead, they sought human explanations for the Quran, attributing it to magic, sorcery, or poetry. They called the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, a poet or a soothsayer, to dismiss his message as a product of human creativity or occult practices. Quran rejected this and emphasized that it is a direct revelation from God, not a product of human creativity. Unlike poetry, which often entertained or glorified tribal pride, the Quran brought societal, moral, and spiritual transformation. Its content had a purpose far beyond mere artistry. The Quran states, indeed the Quran is the word of a noble messenger, and it is not the word of a poet, little do you believe, nor is it the word of a soothsayer, little do you remember. It is a revelation from the Lord of the worlds, chapter 69, verses 40 to 43. And again in chapter 36, verse 69, we did not teach him poetry, nor is it fitting for him. This is only a reminder and a clear Quran. The Quran also directly challenged poets and linguists of Arabia to produce something comparable to its unique style and content, a challenge known as the Challenge of Inimitability, Ijaz al-Quran. This challenge was aimed at demonstrating that the Quran's divine nature set it apart from all human expression, including poetry and prose. Say, if mankind and the jinn gathered to produce the like of this Quran, they could not produce the like of it, even if they were to each other assistants. Chapter 17, verse 88. Some verses in the Quran address poets specifically, warning against those who mislead people with poetry devoid of moral guidance, but highlighting the potential value of poetry rooted in truth and ethical guidance. Chapter 26 of the Quran is named Ash-Shu'ara and addresses poets and the influence of poetry in society, emphasizing that poetry should align with truth and morality. The verses state, "And the poets, only the deviators follow them. Do you not see that they wander in every valley, and that they say what they do not do, except those poets who believe and do righteous deeds and remember Allah often and defend the Muslims after they were wronged." Quran, chapter 26, verses 224 to 227. Islam took a nuanced approach to the poetry of Jahiliya. Pre-Islamic poetry was highly regarded in Arab society. However, some poems glorified vengeance, excessive pride, and immorality, which were at odds with the values that Islam sought to promote. While Islam discouraged poetry that promoted sinful behavior, it generally embraced poetry as long as it was used positively. Islam transformed the purpose of poetry. It encouraged poetry that celebrated virtues like humility, justice, faith, and the unity of the Muslim community. It encouraged refining poetry to align with Islamic principles. Some notable poets of Jahiliya, like Hassan ibn Thabit, converted to Islam and adapted their art to praise Islamic values and defend the Prophet. The Arabs' reverence for language and poetry made the Quran's linguistic excellence a clear sign of its divine source. It disarmed critics and transformed adversaries through its power of meaning and eloquence. Its preservation as the final miracle underscores its enduring relevance and impact. The Quran was not simply a miracle of poetry, but rather a miracle of divine language that surpassed poetry, resonating with an audience that revered eloquence. Its transformative impact extended far beyond its time, continuing to guide and inspire humanity as the ultimate testament to God's wisdom and power. And so, the poetic legacy of the Jahiliya era reveals much more than the beauty of words. It gives us a lens to view the values, struggles, and aspirations of a society shaped by honor, pride, and resilience. But what happens when these values spill beyond words and transform into action on the battlefield? How did the same ethos of honor and pride that shaped their poetry influence their conduct in war? In Part 10, Jahiliya Wars, we'll explore the clashes that defined this era, their causes, the strategies employed, and how these conflicts left an enduring mark on Arabian society. Stay tuned as we transition from the poetic rhythms of the Jahiliya to the thunderous drumbeats of battle in Part 10. Thank you for watching. If you liked the video, please like and share it. Also subscribe our channel. May peace and blessings be upon you all.